Good morning. We will get started with introductions. I know some people are kind of filtering in, so I think we'll let them come in as they can. But we'll just start with introductions and we'll go through our webinar. I'm so happy to have so many of you on this webinar for this one-time special grant program that the Johnson County Board of Supervisors have funded. My name is Allison Wells, and I'm the grants manager for the Board of Supervisors office. I am coordinating this program mostly with my coworker, Sean Donaldson, who is the grant specialist for the Board of Supervisors office. Together, Sean and I administer our annual Economic Development and Quality of Life grant program. We are also working very closely with Lynette Jacoby, our social services director, and Becky Soglin, our sustainability coordinator, who both have a great deal of grants experience. The best way to get in touch with us throughout this program is to email grants@johnsoncountyiowa.gov. I'm just going to emphasize that at the beginning and at the end. And the best source of all information on this program outside of this webinar is www.johnsoncountyiowa.gov/ARPA grants. A recording of this webinar will be posted there after this meeting. The purpose of this webinar is to give just a brief overview of this grant program, describe some of the requirements, as well as some of the technical assistance that Johnson County can provide, give you sort of an introduction to our online grant portal. Some of you have participated in grant cycles that have been on that grant portal, but it is still fairly new and want to make sure that everyone knows how to handle that and doesn't have any technical difficulties with that. And then we want to provide an opportunity for question and answer. If at any point throughout this webinar you have a question, feel free to just type it into the chat. For some questions, we may answer them as we go through the chat, but others we might just wait until the end. And at the end, we will have sort of a designated question and answer time. But if a question comes to you early in the process, feel free to put it in the chat, and that way we have a record of it. So I just wanted to give a brief introduction of the program. I'll throw to Sean at different points in time. But again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. So this is a special one-time grant opportunity funded through the Johnson County Board of Supervisors allocation of the American Rescue Plan Act state and local fiscal recovery funds. Largely, that's a pot of money that's for COVID-19 relief. And the focus of these funds are to provide relief from the negative economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on nonprofit organizations. So the most important thing to be eligible for this program would be to be a registered nonprofit organization, and the U.S. Department of the Treasury defines that for this program as having 501c3 or 501c19 tax status. So that is sort of the first barrier of eligibility. And the second would be that you needed to have some sort of documentation of your negative economic impact from COVID-19. Knowing what I do know about nonprofits in Johnson County, I have every confidence that most organizations did face some negative economic impacts, whether that's reduced revenues, reduced increased costs, increased service needs, that sort of thing. So that's something that we will walk you through, especially when we get to the application stage, about what those sorts of impacts are and the ways that you can document them. But that's just sort of the clear hurdle to get through. And beyond that, once you've sort of documented your impact, then this grant is here to help you build capacity to weather future financial crises, future pandemics, and to really give you some funds to increase your ability to do the great work that you do in Johnson County and for Johnson County residents. Because these grants are funded from the American Rescue Plan Act, that means that they're federal funding. And so they do come with a lot of strings that most Johnson County grants don't come with. And so that's part of why we're doing this two-stage application process, which we'll go through in a few slides, just to give everyone the time, including Johnson County, the time to provide the kind of support that we need to provide to help everyone be successful through this process. So the eligible projects for this grant fall into sort of three buckets. One would be increased staffing capacity. The second is capital improvements, and the third is internal infrastructure. And we'll go into a little bit more detail about each of those in a second. And then there's that last piece that we mentioned about the COVID-19 impact. And I want to be clear here, the the rules from Treasury are that all requests need to be responsive and proportionate to your COVID-19 impact that you identify. And by that, I don't mean, if your organization can document like a $20,000 revenue loss due to COVID-19 pandemic, that does not limit your organization to a request of $20,000. But it does mean that if you do submit a request for $200,000, that's not super proportionate. So that's just the kind of thing we're thinking about. And that's something that we will ask for a lot more information on at the application stage and not so much at the letter of interest, stage. So to get into those eligible categories with a little bit more detail, the first is increased staff capacity. And these are based on the eligible uses. These three buckets are based on the eligible uses that Treasury has given guidance for local governments to give this kind of assistance to nonprofits, but it's also based on a community needs assessment that we conducted for I think it's from about December of 2022 through June of 2023. We heard from organizations about what sort of needs from COVID-19 had already been met and where the sort of future needs were. And these are the three buckets of eligible uses that also seem to be unmet in our community. And so the first being increased staff capacity. The biggest thing to think about here is that this is a one-time award that's going to be 1 to 2 years. So it's not the best way to support a bunch of new staff or to really increase your staffing efforts, because it's important to have sort of a sustainability plan for what to do after this funding runs out. But this would be a really good way to, if your staff needs some specialized training, or if you need temporary staff to get through like a particular project, or if you want like a temporary wage increase for your staff, and then you have a sustainability plan afterwards, that's something that would be eligible. The second sort of bucket is capital improvements and capital upgrades. And this is where I think I'll throw a little bit to Becky Soglin, who's our sustainability coordinator. But in general, for the way that the U.S. Treasury Department defines capital improvements are, upgrades and things that would enhance the value of the assets that your organization would already own. And Becky, do you want to do a little say your piece? Oh, you're muted.
So, sorry, I was just saying I'm a little bit under the weather and not the sharpest at the moment, which I just proved that point. So, but I will do my best to make sense for all of you. And of course, I'll be available for follow-up if you have questions. So for those of you who have applied before through social services for our sustainability grants for nonprofits, you have a little bit of a sense already about what these kinds of projects might be. And for those of you who haven't gone through that, we can just briefly give you the overview here. The information that Allison put there on the right shows the kind of sustainability considerations. And before I mention those, a lot of these things, it will matter whether you own your building or not. If you don't own your building, you may not be eligible for some of these things because of, it's making improvements to something that is not really, your own asset. So that would be one issue. And also if for anything like a daycare, like if you're running that out of your home, which is your primary residence, again, those types of projects probably will not be eligible. But the things we're looking at, the sustainability considerations, are things like energy efficient systems and renewable energy would be an option only after you've done energy efficiencies and conservations. A good way to know what your building really needs is to do an audit. Sometimes these are available at no cost from your utility. It depends in part on the size of your building. We know that for a lot of the nonprofits, your square footage is not going to be large enough to be eligible, but if you do want to do one for yourself, generally you could get one for about $300 to $500, and I could direct you to some sources for doing that, because that will tell you really what your top priority is. Maybe it's really insulation versus doing some other project. And again, as I mentioned, with renewable energy, those type of things are generally encouraged once you've done other efficiencies. Though for geothermal, if you're putting in a brand new system, that could be an option. those of you who end up using a lot of water in whatever your service provision is, you may want to be looking at that. Sometimes that also can be something as part of just general energy efficiency systems. An audit will look at that. And then other things have to do with resource use and management. Are you using disposable products where there's a way you could use something more durable? Transportation. I believe I'm correct, Allison, that vehicles could potentially be an eligible request. Of course, there we'd be looking for something that's like an EV or a very high efficiency hybrid. There's also, in conjunction with doing especially building energy efficiencies, there are utility rebates and things available through the Inflation Reduction Act, and I can try to guide you through some of that. I'll be honest, we are still learning about it, and some of the federal rules on these things are not yet fully written. But bottom line, I would say, understand who your utility providers are. Some of you may be on split provision where natural gas is from one and electric is from the other, so you may have to deal with both. And I think what I can do, Allison, is maybe later by Monday, can we maybe at a section of the website, I can get some links to the different utilities and just a little bit of these pointers, and then you can forward to me any specific requests. But I hope that sufficiently kind of cover our overview here, hopefully.
Perfect. Yes. Thank you so much. Yeah. So in general, with all of these capital improvements, we will want you to keep issues of sustainability and energy efficiency in mind. And for a lot of this webinar, we're giving kind of a high level overview. And if you have specific questions about how this might relate to your project or your project idea, please just send us an email at grants@johnsoncountyiowa.gov, or, fill out the letter of interest. And that's really a chance for us to then understand sort of what you're needing, what you're asking for, and then ways that we can sort of help you. So if you end up going for the capital improvements or upgrades option, eligibility, we will be providing a budget template. And we're asking each organization to make sure that they're requesting only one in one of the three buckets, either staffing capacity or capital improvements or internal infrastructure. But we know that projects like capital improvements or like getting a new software take a lot of staff time. And so we do want you to be able to put into and we will allow you to, in your budget template, to record or to request some staff time for this project. It won't be like a fully staffing project, but it will allow you the administrative time that it takes to oversee a capital project going on in your building, or to oversee the implementation of a software and the acquisition of a software and all of the time that entails. So that's some sort of clarity on, you pick one bucket, but you are also allowed to request staff time for the time it takes to oversee a big project like this. And one other kind of sticky thing to remember about the American Rescue Plan Act funding is that it's a hard rule from Treasury that you cannot pay for costs that were incurred before March 3rd of 2021. And if you have this major project and you did sort of start the process before March 3rd, 2021, this is a good chance to reach out to us and we can talk through ways that you can scope your project or scope your request to be something that happened after March 3rd, 2021. And that magic date is just relating to when the American Rescue Plan Act was passed. So that's sort of our spiel on capital upgrades. And then our third eligible bucket of eligibility would be internal infrastructure. And this would be any sort of internal system upgrades to increase your capacity. We heard during our needs assessment about software needs, other financial system needs, IT systems, or other hardware equipment needs. If you need like new computers or something like that, this is where you can request those. And as with the previous slide, we will have a budget template that will allow you to use staff time. We've recently implemented a grants management software at Johnson County, and we know exactly how much time that takes to upgrade to a new system. So we want to make sure that we can compensate the time away from doing other activities for that. Okay, before I get into Federal Grants 101, I did want to emphasize again, and all of this information is on our website, and you probably have seen this if you've already registered for this webinar, but in general, this is a one-time funding opportunity the total budget of the program is 2.1 million, but there are sort of two categories within that. The board set aside 100,000, so the 0.1 part, for local arts organizations. So local arts organizations will be competing against local arts organizations. And then the 2 million is the other category that any other nonprofit that doesn't identify as a local arts organization will be competing for. And that's just the way the board decided to do that. But in particular, we are seeking out social service, childcare, and other sort of non-arts nonprofits to be competing in that larger pool. Our intention is to make this 1 or 2 year awards starting roughly in January 1st of 2024. This application cycle will take us through the end of the year, and we hope to have contracts executed by the end of the calendar year, so that it would be sort of calendar year 2024 and or calendar year 2025, depending on your request and sort of what your needs are. And we understand that sometimes projects of this magnitude, like a large construction project, can face a bunch of delays and unforeseen obstacles. And so we do want to be flexible with the award duration and amount based on those needs. But we do want to try and keep your request needs to be for either 2024 or 2024 and 2025. So if that makes some sense. Okay. And then we just wanted to talk through some of the other things that are really important to consider with federal funding, receiving and administering federal funding. So in general, when you have federal funding, you need to be really careful about what you're spending that on and how you're choosing what to spend it on. And so if you are procuring something, so that's a contractor, a piece of software, a piece of equipment, something that you're purchasing, there's different sort of thresholds and different sort of things you need to do for that based on federal regulations. So anything under $10,000 is something that the federal government considers a micro purchase, and no documentation is needed, no extra paperwork is needed for any purchase under $10,000. But once you get above that $10,000 threshold, the federal government requires a certain amount of documentation and research to be done when you're spending that volume of money. So anything between $10,000 and $250,000, the federal government requires what they call an adequate number of price quotes before purchase. And we can debate all day what an adequate number means, but it usually means at least 2, ideally in like the 3 to 5 category, depending on what you're trying to procure. So if you're trying to get a new software, it's a really good idea to price it out. And as like most of us, we often like price shop, you try and find the best deal. That's something that the federal government is requiring you to do when you're making purchases at a certain level. And this is just something that Johnson County staff can help you with, but this is something that we will be asking you to keep documentation of if you are procuring something with these funds. So if you need to buy a bunch of computers or some particular type of equipment that's $20,000, we're going to ask you sort of where you priced out and what the other price quotes might be, so that we know that it was procured properly per federal regulation. Anything over $250,000 requires a much more rigorous process of some sort of publicized opportunities. So like a request for proposals or a sort of bid process that can get much more onerous. So this is something we wanted to tell you at this stage of the process, because if you are in a place of trying to decide how much to request and how to scope your project, keeping these threshold standards in mind is a good idea. And this is not to dissuade you from picking a certain number, but something that's worth us having a conversation about, of how Johnson County can help you and also how we can do something that will not be excessively onerous for your organization. You are not allowed to favor local businesses when you are making these sort of these determinations for procurement, but you are asked to take steps to contract with small, women-owned and minority-owned businesses, and definitely favoring US-based companies. In general, with federal funding, we will be doing risk assessment for all of our grantees. So if you make it through the grant process, we will be doing a risk assessment prior to actual like disbursement of funds. And that will sort of help us understand the level of site visits and compliance monitoring, desk reviews we may need to do for your organization. expect quarterly reporting on activities and expenditures. So that's just something to keep in mind. Again, some of our grants require things close to this level. Many of our Johnson County grants don't require this. And so this is just something to keep in mind that's special with this funding because it is federal funding. Okay, this is in part because it is such a complicated process with all the federal funding regulations. We've decided to devise this. We structured this into a two-stage grant process. And a lot of this is just to give Johnson County staff the time to assist you through the process. So we've got the letter of interest. Please, 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 if you are interested at all, apply, submit a letter of interest. This will give us a sense of the need and the variety of requests, and then that will give us the opportunity to tailor our technical assistance in terms of sustainability, in terms of federal funding, to help you get through this process. So during the letter of interest phase, which again closes at the end of the day on Friday, September 1st, staff will review and then we'll invite organizations to apply at a certain dollar threshold. So that's when we can sort of have I'll tell you like what sort of the limit is that you can request. You will not be able to submit an application for the actual grant process if you have not done the letter of interest. So please, 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 if you're interested at all, fill out a letter of interest. At the application stage, that's where we're going to ask for more documentation. We'll ask for documentation of the negative economic impact your organization experienced due to COVID-19. And that's where we will have a more rigorous evaluation that will sort of determine like the proportionality of your request versus the COVID-19 impact. As we mentioned before, we will have a budget template. So you can fill out or information in the template that we give you so that we can sort of compare apples to apples. This is also going to be a time when we will have a duplication of benefits check. We know that many of these organizations have already received American Rescue Plan Act funding from the city of Iowa City or from Johnson County. If you have received awards from them, that doesn't mean that you are prohibited from applying for this, but it does mean that you will need to scope it separately. So if you've received a grant from Johnson County that funds a program with American Rescue Plan Act funds, that should not disqualify you for this, but we will obviously not be able to fund that program as well. And you shouldn't be asking programming funding for this funding source anyway. So these are, we have every confidence that we can find a way to fund your organization, but we do need to make sure that we're not spending federal funding on the same exact thing. And then this will also be a chance for us to do more technical assistance. Just running you through the proposed grant cycle really quickly. We launched the letter of interest on August 14th. Today is that webinar. Application or the letter of interest is due at the end of the day on September 1st, 2023, right before Labor Day weekend. And then we'll have a couple weeks of internal Johnson County staff review, and then we will launch the actual application period ideally on September 18th, and that will be open for roughly a month. And then will be more internal county review, and then final decisions will all be made by the Johnson County Board of Supervisors. Discussion will happen in a work session, and that is where the funding decisions will actually be made. Staff review criteria will look at things like the demonstration of need, like sort of what role what sort of was your COVID-19 impact, and then what overall does your organization do in the community. The responsiveness and proportionality of the request that we mentioned before, the sustainability of what you're doing. Are we able to fund something fully so that it can go all the way through, or do you need additional assistance to fund the rest of the project, and what is sort of your plan for that? Your readiness to meet federal regulations and requirements, your experience with federal funding, your ability to accomplish the project in the amount of time that you have. And then things like sustainability considerations for those capital improvement project ideas. And then again, the Board of Supervisors will make all funding decisions. So now I am going to throw to Sean Donaldson, who's going to walk you through just sort of the basics of the Johnson County grants portal to show you how to submit your request and sort of walk you through all the kinds of questions we're asking for the letter of interest. I know many of you have probably already started your applications. So yeah, Sean will take it away.
Sure, okay, I'm gonna share my screen really quickly here. Okay, did that handoff go okay? Perfect. Okay, so to get to our grants portal for this particular grant program, you'll want to head to the grants website, which is johnsoncountyiowa.gov/ARPA grants. This is what you will find there. As you scroll down the page, you'll find lots of helpful information, but then you'll find this big link that says begin a letter of interest submission here. So you'll click that link and it will take you to the grants portal. If you've used the grants portal before, you'll sign in using your email and password. If you haven't, you'll go ahead and create an account using this link here, and you'll be able to enter your email, create a password, and create your account. That way you'll get a confirmation email when you do. Otherwise, we'll just go ahead and sign in. And then it will show us in progress ones. We don't have an in progress one yet, so we'll want to double back really quickly to our Johnson County website. And then when we click this, once we're signed in, it should take us right into the form. So on this first page, we'll be able to pick what type of organization we represent. Of course, 501c3s and 501c19s are eligible organizations. Different tax classifications won't get you into the form. But if we were a nonprofit, we'll go ahead and take us through the letter of interest, and then we'll be able to fill out who we are, where we're located, our organization type. And then this next question asks for geographical area served. We've heard that this question has had some bugs for some applicants who have started this letter of interest already. So if you run into an issue with this question, please go ahead and skip it, remove all your answers, and then it should let you pass through without answering it. It's an optional question. If you do have any issues with that, please let us know at grants@johnsoncountyiowa.gov. But we'll ask for a few other pieces of information here: your mission statement, your tax ID, your unique entity identifier. If you don't already have a unique entity identifier, we do have an explanation on how to register for that information. That is a federal number that you'll get from sam.gov, and that's becoming increasingly required to access funding, especially at the federal level. And so we're working to build our community's readiness by making sure all of us have those numbers ready to go now. So we'll ask you to register for that. You'll explain in the experience you have and your contact information. On the next page, you'll document that COVID-19 impacts. You'll pick one of the ways that COVID-19 did impact your organization and then give us a little explanation. Then you'll offer your proposal, including an amount, an overview, which funding priority your project fits into. You'll demonstrate that need, explain how your previous experience and existing infrastructure will help you complete this project, explain how this funding will expand your capacity to serve, and then give us a guesstimate as to when this project will start and when this project will end in terms of expenditure of this funding. That'll help us determine whether this project fits into that 1-year or 2-year award category, like Allison was mentioning earlier. And then once you've filled all of that out, you'll get a chance to review the application. On this page, if you haven't filled out anything that's required, you'll get a nice red error field like I have here, but you can fix those as you work through this review page. Then if you fix anything here, you'll get an update button, and then once you've updated and corrected all those errors, you'll get an opportunity to submit. When you submit that letter of interest, you will receive an email with all of your responses, and it will transmit straight to county staff here to proceed with that review and move us towards that application stage. If you do need to save partway through, you have the ability to save and finish later. And then what you'll do is you'll use that same begin a letter of interest link on the grants website. And it will take you to this page where you'll now have an in-progress application that you can continue. It'll show right here. And you'll be able to click in and finish that up and then submit it to us when you are ready. I saw a question or two come through on the chat. Allison, are you answering those in real time? Okay, perfect. So that is how this process will work. Then once those letter of interests have been reviewed and our team has pushed forward into the application cycle, we'll be able to push those out to you as a second stage. We'll notify all applicants by email that those are available, and you'll find them in this same portal window, and it will appear under this in progress field here. So that's where you'll see that second stage when it's available on September 18th.
All right, I'll just start answering the questions orally. I think that might be faster than me typing. So the first question, and yeah, now is a great time for questions. So if you have any questions, start typing. So the first question was if there was a specific character or word count maximum for any of those sort of open-ended responses, and the answer is no. I would caution you against writing a dissertation just for our ease of reading and evaluating, but you can type if the number of lines you type exceeds the box, it will allow you to start scrolling. So you can, that's possible. There was a question about if purchases for software or infrastructure after March 3rd, 2021, but have already been purchased, if those are eligible. I would say we would encourage you to be purchasing something. We would prefer for this funds to go to something that you will purchase in the time of the grant award. If you really can't come up with another project in that time or another sort of way that we can help you increase your capacity, then we can have a conversation about it. But we would prefer to be funding something that is you're going to purchase to enable you to purchase something.
In that case, though, if you did shift other funding to cover that software purchase when you made that purchase, and that funding shift has left an opening elsewhere that might fit under these grant requirements, we would encourage that ask as well.
Yes. Okay, we've got one about mention temporary staffing as a potential project, but what about permanent staffing as it relates to a new need because of COVID and we have long-term funding plan in place? That is fine. Yeah, if you say you need to staff up, but you have a good plan for how to fund after the first 2 years of us funding, that is a great request. As new construction eligible activity. Yes, new construction is an eligible activity. We will ask that you keep in mind a lot of the sustainability concerns that we raised earlier, and that's something that we can sort of help you in building into that project as you go. The program, go for it.
Sorry, Allison, if I could just jump in.
Yeah.
For new construction of facilities, both major utilities in Johnson County, Alliant and Mid-American do have programs for which you may be eligible and do require early engagement. So, but those programs can be very beneficial. You get potentially not only a financial incentive at some point, but also technical assistance. So some of it would depend on the size of the structure, but generally there should be some additional utility assistance.
Question about the needs assessment. It was not a super robust one, so we don't have a lot of information about the capital needs beyond that capital needs were something that was identified. We are mostly trying to see, because the American Rescue Plan Act has a lot of information in there about preventing COVID-19 spread in workplaces. We were pretty sure that local organizations did not need assistance with building outdoor workplaces or spacing out employees anymore by the time we launched this program. So that was mostly where we captured our questions, but the results of the needs assessment that we did are in our presentation to the Board of Supervisors earlier this month. I think it was on August 2nd. We can send you a link to that if you would like. Okay, is a program that received funding from the Johnson County Community Food and Farm Grant ineligible for funds? No. Would the organization be ineligible for just that program? Yeah, you would need to. We just couldn't fund the exact same thing that the Community Food and Farm Grant is funding. So if they are giving you funding to build a shed or something, then we would not be able to support the funding of the building of that shed, but we could support you in other ways. Like if you needed software, we could help you with that. Or if you needed a secondary structure, we could help you with that.
And when we get to the application stage, that's where we'll look for kind of a budget table that explains what you're pursuing with this funding and what other funding you've received towards that project. And so that would be a place to identify, we've met this need, but we still have this need, and that's what we're asking for funds for. And that'll separate out that duplication of benefits for us.
Absolutely. Request funds for more than one type of funding. No, we would like you to request in one of the 3 buckets. But as we mentioned before, there are ways that, if you're doing a capital project, that you can request the staff time that it will take to oversee that project. What about recently completed construction that still hasn't been fully funded? That is something we can definitely have a conversation about. That's where the sort of scoping of the project is important to make sure that, and then the way that those services were procured is important. So that if you have a specific thing like that, that might be worth an email to us and we could talk through the best way to scope your project that would be eligible for this funding and be kosher with the federal government. All right, if we need staff and equipment or vehicles to fully implement a project, can we ask for both or do we need to choose a category? I would say you would need to choose a category. And if, so I would say,
I
Sean?
would kind of further contextualize that answer by presenting this as a holistic project. So if the project is to expand the capacity through this equipment and these vehicles, but then you have to pay for the administrative burden or the staff time related to executing that increased capacity, to me, that's probably going to fit in that capital or infrastructure project category. But thinking of it as that holistic project should help narrow down which category it goes into.
And this is also part of why we're doing the letter of interest. If you're requesting something and we think the category you're requesting it in is not the best one for that, that's where we will tell you, like, please apply for, submit an application for this bucket for this amount. All right, paying off loans and mortgage. We saw that question earlier, Audrey. Yes, that's something where we would also like to help you scope it in a different way. Like if you had to move funds in order to, if you had to make other sacrifices with your funding previously to try and make things happen, that's, I think, where we want to talk about how we could fund something else. Does that make, I think a more detailed email where we could talk through the process would be helpful. And I know you sent us an email, we will respond. Is the funding for only one calendar? Yes, it is possible for funding to be for both calendar years.
And then I see a question about ARPA funding from Iowa City. Really, the only concern with receiving funding from Iowa City is just that ARPA funding is federal funding, and we have an obligation from the federal government to make sure that we're not duplicating benefits with that funding. So like we were talking about with programs and organizations, as long as we can identify a new need for funding to go to, this will not prohibit you from seeking funding from Johnson County.
Allison, may I add one item about timing? And well, obviously the priority here is the funding of how this grant program works. For some utility rebates, you would potentially only have one calendar year in which to submit, but some of those things can be considered, if you will, gravy. They would be extra rebate coming back to you. So if you couldn't get that because you need to space your project over 18 months instead of the 12, by the end of a calendar year that utility requires, it's not going to be the worst thing. It'll be more of an issue for anybody doing more of a larger project like a commercial new construction, but those usually the utility is going to provide more time for that to get done. So the priority is obviously the grant deadlines of this program, the county's ARPA program, and I will do my best and the utilities will, try to work with you. But again, some of their stuff is simply on a calendar year.
Yes, the purchase of new property is a possibility. Yes, as long as what the city is paying for and what the county is paying for are not the same thing. And like Sean said, the application process is a place for us to really understand what the city is paying for and what the county can pay for. But yes, if they funded just part of a project, we can pay for part of it as well. We just need to make sure that we're not funding the same thing at the same time. We'll stay on for a few more minutes if those questions keep rolling in. But other than that, thank you all for attending this webinar. We really appreciate the interest in this project, and we look forward to seeing your applications. We hope that these funds go to good use in the community. And yeah, any other questions, please email grants@johnsoncountyiowa.gov and we'll get back to you. And we will put a recording of this webinar on the website.
And be sure to visit johnsoncountyiowa.gov/ARPA grants. There's a wealth of information there as well if you haven't been there yet.
Yeah, and if we start getting a lot of the same question, that's where we will start putting our frequently answered questions. Yes, that's a good question. You do not need to necessarily be located in Johnson County, but yes, the majority of your impact needs to be in Johnson County, so that would be okay. I don't know if I can unmute someone. Tess, can you unmute yourself? I don't know if you can, but you can type in a question if you have one. Oh, there
I
you are.
can't, it won't let me, I can't get into the chat, whatever chat room you're using. I'm
Okay.
sorry, I couldn't figure it out. I just was wondering if we're collecting bids, like say it's over the 10,000 range, and we choose, like, can we choose to go with a more knowledgeable contractor, even if they're not the least expensive? Like, if we get all of these bids and we decide that someone is a better fit?
Yes. Yeah, you're allowed to prioritize more than just the price, but yeah, you'd want to make sure that it's for something like they understand what you're doing better, or they have some technical knowledge or skill in that area.
Okay, and I mean, I'm assuming we need to document that in some way, but
Yeah.
perfect. And for instance, we've already collected our bids on a capital campaign, so we've started contracting, individuals. So as long
Sure.
as we can explain why we chose those individuals and show the competing bids, that should be
appropriate. Yeah.
okay. All right, perfect. That was my only question. Sorry about the chat thing.
No, I'm glad you could unmute yourself.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Good. All right, I think we'll close it out at 11:45. If anyone has any final questions, feel free to email us and talk to you later. Bye, Becky.